In 1964, James Brown's unexpected inability to sing was unknown. He was prohibited from recording by his record label. His greatest hits were taken off the shelves. He nearly lost everything. Now, a startling contract from that year shows what actually transpired: a covert agreement, a huge betrayal, and the altercation that forever altered the music industry. They attempted to conceal this story. On May 3, 1933, James Brown was born in Barnwell, South Carolina, in a small wooden hut. His parents were young and struggling to make ends meet. Families like theirs had virtually nothing left after the Great Depression. Their home was without plumbing or electricity. In search of a better life, they relocated to Augusta, Georgia, when James was about 4 or 5 years old. However, things only became more difficult. His father left him with his Aunt Honey, who operated a brothel in one of the most dangerous areas of the city, after his parents divorced. Aunt Honey was not an easy person to live with. A child had no place at the brothel. James witnessed things that no child should ever witness. He had to work there in addition to living there. He did errands, helped attract clients, and even shined shoes on the street for a few cents. There was always the issue of money. He didn't get his first pair of store-bought pants until he was 9 years old. He struggled every day, yet he never grumbled. He simply figured out how to live. James discovered music, which brought him joy despite everything else. He learned how to play the harmonica, guitar, and piano on his own. Gospel music offered him hope, and church was one of the few places where he felt secure. He also came to a significant realization. Those who wanted to see him perform would pay. In World War II, if he danced well enough, soldiers passing through town would toss in cash. Customers would throw money at an excellent show, even at the brothel. James was already developing into the entertainer he was destined to be without even realizing it. However, there was no improvement in the streets. He was expelled from school when he was 12 due to his lack of appropriate attire. The school wouldn't let him stay, and his family couldn't afford nice clothes. Despite the humiliation, James remained strong. He would find another method to make ends meet if he couldn't go to school. He put in more effort than ever before. He danced for tips close to military outposts, cleaned cars, and shined shoes. He even picked cotton. He did whatever he had to do, even though the money was awful. Music evolved beyond being a means of escape. He began participating in talent events and soon gained recognition. He performed for so long that he won a competition at Augusta's Lenox Theater. His father brought an ancient pump organ home at this time. James was unaffected by his lack of formal instruction. He continued to improve while playing by ear. Then his life changed drastically. He was arrested for auto theft when he was 15. According to some, he was merely attempting to survive. He became entangled in the wrong crowd. In any case, he received a sentence of 3 years in a Toccoa, Georgia, juvenile reform facility. That would have been the end of the road for most children. It turned out to be a pivotal moment for James. He wasted little time pitying himself at the reform school. Along with Johnny Terry and other prisoners, he created a gospel quartet. He had a purpose and was able to hone his skills through singing. He also met a young musician named Bobby Bird there, whose family would ultimately transform his life. By proving their support for him in court, the Byrds assisted in his release. Bird was the leader of the Gospel Starlighters, a gospel ensemble. Upon witnessing Brown's abilities, he extended an invitation for him to join. Brown was first merely a member of the group, but things were starting to change. The gospel was dying. The music was shifting to rhythm and blues. Their transition didn't take long. They changed their name to the Flames by 1954 and began touring Georgia and South Carolina. Although Brown sang backing and played drums, he was constantly overlooked. On stage, his enthusiasm was unmissable. The manner he moved quickly made him the leader of the group. The unadulterated passion in his voice and the way he sung. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. Everything changed in 1956. It began with a serviette that was crumpled. "Please, please" was what Little Richard had scrawled on it. Brown also noticed something about them. He grabbed that line, worked with Johnny Terry to make it into a song, and wouldn't let it go. Producer Ralph Bass lobbied for the tune when they signed Federal Records. Sid Nathan, the creator of the label, was not persuaded. Brown's voice sounded too harsh and desperate to him. Bass wasted his time, and he almost fired him. But it took off as soon as Please was broadcast. The song sold over 1 million copies and peaked at number 6 on the R&B charts. In every performance, Brown gave it his all. Sweat streaming down his cheeks, he dropped to his knees and begged the audience with each sentence. It had an electric charge. However, nothing worked after that initial blow. 9 singles in a row failed. They were losing momentum. Uncertainties began to creep in. The group began to disintegrate. The majority of the initial flames had gone by 1958. There was no money coming in. The spotlight was waning. Brown, however, would not let it go. He reorganized the group from the ground up, adding new members and continuing on. Then inspiration struck while making a stop in Florida. Try Me is a song he wrote. It was the softest thing he had ever done. A request for a second chance in love. He worked with producer Andy Gibson to record it in New York. And everything changed when it was made available in October 1958. His first #1 single on the R&B charts was Try Me. Even the Billboard Hot 100 featured it. James Brown was back in a flash. However, survival was insufficient. Brown desired authority. He was obviously the star after Please. It didn't sit well with the rest of the group, though. They had had enough by the end of 1957. The most of them left. That might have been it. Brown, however, saw it as a fresh start. He brought in other vocalists to take their place, including Little Richard's old band Flames, who served as his backing. James Brown, on the other hand, left fans speechless with his high-octane live performances. He commanded, danced, and enthralled in addition to singing. For good cause, they dubbed him the hardest working guy in show business. Sharp choreography and an unparalleled sense of showmanship propelled Brown's performances, which were bursting with energy. His iconic splits, dramatic slides, lightning-fast footwork, and well-known dance techniques made him a household name. What really made him stand out was his cape routine. Gorgeous George, a wrestler, served as Brown's inspiration. His crew would pull him off stage when he was overcome with emotion and put a cape over his shoulders, but a few seconds later, he would toss it off and rush back to the mic as like he had been born again. Each time, the audience exploded. His behavior was not an accident. Every rotation, every step, and every pause was meticulously practiced. The famous Flames, his backup band, moved in perfect time with him, fusing motion and sound in a seamless way. Perfect. It was required, not merely expected. Brown penalized musicians who arrived late or missed a note. He was aware that a great concert and a show that made history depended on immaculate execution. That self-control paid off. He gave performances akin to those at Madison Square Garden, even in modest venues on the Chitlin circuit. His performance at the 1964 TAMI show was so amazing that even the Rolling Stones, who were his bandmates, felt like an afterthought. Brown was never a showman. It belonged to him. Live at the Apollo encapsulated his magnetism more than any other moment. Although Brown was already well known in R&B in 1962, King Records, his record label, would not support a live album. It was not expected to sell. Brown was unconcerned. He covered the cost of the recording personally. Live at the Apollo was one of the most influential albums ever released in 1963. It was an experience rather than merely a recording because of the crowd's fervor, Brown's voice's unadulterated passion, and the way each cheer and scream felt like a part of the song. It was played from beginning to end by radio DJs. Copies were worn out by fans. It peaked at number 2 and remained on the Billboard charts for 66 weeks, which was unprecedented for an R&B live album at the time. It was more than just a smash, it revolutionized the music business. Demonstrated that live recordings were more than just mementos. They might turn into events, and it offered him creative control, which is even more valuable. He was able to take music to new heights thanks to such control. He wasn't only making hits by the middle of the 1960s. A whole new genre was being created by him. I feel pleased since I got you and Papa has a brand new bag. They were funk blueprints, not simply songs. Brown emphasized rhythm while removing extraneous elements. The groove was the song, not only a supporting component. The guitar licks, powerful horns, and tight bass lines all fit together like a machine, while Brown's vocals pierced through with a preacher-like intensity. A revolution took place. Music wasn't all that funk was. It was power, movement, and attitude. Hip-hop as we know it, Parliament Funkadelic, and Prince would not exist without Brown's inventions, but ingenuity by itself did not establish James Brown as a legend. He had a strong work ethic. Brown didn't pause when other performers did. He played up to 335 nights a year at his best. There has never been a schedule like that. If his band didn't keep up, they would be kicked out. They were penalized if their clothes weren't spotless or their shoes weren't shining. Because every performance was important to Brown, he approached his shows as if they were military operations. He was unstoppable because of his determination, but it had a cost. Years of constant touring caught up with him by the late 1970s. The physical strain and fatigue were unavoidable. Brown never really slowed down, though, even at that point. James Brown made a choice in 1964 that would permanently alter the music industry. King Records had irritated him. They had rigorous contracts. Their business practices were out of date. He took a chance because he wanted more control over his songs. Through the production business Fair Deal, which he co-founded, he acquired a contract with Smash Records, a division of Mercury Records. This change allowed him to work in better settings and experiment with new sounds. He was not visible during his first major release with Smash. It wasn't merely a hit. It peaked at number 5 on the R&B charts and number 24 on the Billboard Hot 100. More significantly, it established a fresh aesthetic, a raw intensity that would come to characterize funk music. However, his choice had repercussions. He was still under contract with King Records. They had no intention of letting their brightest star leave. They filed a lawsuit and were granted an injunction. James Brown was not permitted to sing, but he was permitted to record instrumentals for Smash. This was a major setback for a man whose voice was his most powerful tool. He could have bided his time till the court case was over. He had the option to slow down. Rather, he took the opposite action. He immersed himself in performing live. He gave it his all on stage every night. His performances were legendary. He made sure to live up to the reputation that he was the hardest working man in show business. Brown was constructing something larger as solicitors debated in court. He was working on his voice. He was influencing music's direction. He had to be inventive without singing. He increased the pressure on his band. The beats became more precise. The groves became more pronounced. Something new had already been hinted at by Out of Sight. Brown was going farther now. Instead of holding him back, the legal limits were helping him advance. He was about to invent an entirely new genre. After a protracted battle with King Records, Brown eventually made a breakthrough in 1965. He secured a new contract after protracted discussions. Distinct. He had more flexibility and control over his work than most artists had ever experienced. This went beyond a single contract. It demonstrated that musicians could challenge the status quo. James Brown won more than just his personal fight. He brought about a transformation in the music industry. Artists could battle for their rights, as demonstrated by his case. It demonstrated that record labels were not infallible. His example was followed by later musicians. Better deals were what they demanded. They refused to be bound by unfavorable agreements. For years to come, the industry was influenced by Brown's struggle for creative control. And this was only the beginning for him. James Brown was more than just a performer. He advocated for reform. Tension was roiling throughout America in 1968. Despite the advancements made by the civil rights movement, racial inequity persisted. Cities all around the nation erupted in grief and rage after Martin Luther King Jr. was slain in April. Say It Loud was released by Brown a few months later. I'm proud to be black. It was a declaration rather than merely a song. The song's lyrics encouraged members of the black community to be proud of who they are and to demand the respect they are due. The message was conveyed by the recording itself. To join him in chanting the hymn, Brown rallied 30 children from Watson Compton. They were more than simply background singers as they yelled, "I'm black and I'm proud." Their refusal to be silenced served as a symbol of the next generation. Not everyone rejoiced when the song peaked at number 1 on the R&B charts and at number 10 on Billboard's Hot 100. Brown said that he lost many of his crossover supporters as a result of what some white audiences perceived as being overly confrontational. He never regretted making it, though. He was aware that the song had a greater impact than album sales. He tackled education, another significant subject, 2 years prior. Brown was from a low-income family in South Carolina. Due to a lack of appropriate clothing, he left school in the 7th grade. He was familiar with the experience of being abandoned. He used his music to make a statement in 1966, when black student dropout rates were rapidly increasing. He sent a straightforward yet pressing warning when he released "Don't Be a Dropout." You might as well be dead if you don't have an education. Every dollar the song brought in was donated to dropout prevention initiatives by him. President Lyndon B. Johnson recognized his efforts by inviting him to the White House because of the enormous impact. Brown, however, did not merely discuss the problem. After visiting schools and interacting with youngsters, he established a trust fund to support children's education. He continued to be dedicated even in his last years. The similar theme was conveyed in his final hit, "Killing Is Out, School Is In." Remain in school and away from the streets. The day following the assassination of Martin Luther King, Jr., on April 5, 1968, he faced his greatest leadership challenge. Major cities were already experiencing riots, and Boston was tense. The Boston Garden was supposed to host Brown's performance that evening, but city officials discussed calling off the event. They were worried that additional violence might result. Brown thought of something else. In an attempt to keep people inside and reduce tension, he persuaded them to broadcast the concert live. It was successful. To watch, thousands stayed at home. Additionally, Brown transcended his role as a performer within the theater. He turned into a mediator. Law enforcement intervened forcefully when crowds rushed the stage. Brown instructed the officers to move aside and turn down the music. Then he faced the audience. Or your ethnicity, the audience paid attention. The stress subsided. What may have been anarchy turned into a time of solidarity. His impact extended beyond activism and music. His political power was genuine. Both parties realized he could inspire black voters, therefore they wanted his support. Despite his Republican affiliation and support for Richard Nixon, he never allowed politics to dictate his goals. During the holidays, he worked directly in communities, providing food and gifts to families in need while advocating for support for black colleges and businesses. His decisions were not universally accepted. He received criticism for his support of conservative politicians and his performances for American troops in Vietnam. However, party lines didn't matter to Brown. Action was important to him. He advocated for both education and economic freedom using his position. He was aware that change needed to come from all directions. Action might make words a reality, leadership could bring people together, and music could inspire. James Brown's wealth came from sheer willpower. There was a reason he was dubbed the hardest working man in show business. At his best, he gave energetic performances at about 300 appearances annually, leaving audiences clamoring for more. He released 116 songs that made it onto Billboard's Hot 100 over the course of 50 years. His fortune increased with each hit. But music wasn't the only source of his income. Brown recognized the value of ownership. With a constant focus on the black community, he purchased fast food outlets, real estate, and radio stations. Purchasing the radio station WRDW in Augusta, Georgia, was one of his finest achievements. He had shined shoes outside that exact station as a kid. It became his years later. Another consistent source of income was his music catalog. Long after they were released, songs like Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, I Feel Good, and I Got You continued to generate royalties. His wealth at its height would be approximately $140 million in today's currency. However, Brown's money never remained in one location for very long. He trusted the wrong people with his money, lived extravagantly, and spent lavishly. His success was reflected in his lifestyle. Opulent houses, private planes, and fancy automobiles. Although they weren't always run effectively, he controlled radio stations like Webb in Baltimore and WJBE in Knoxville. His schedule was as disorganized as his finances. He preferred to travel with big sums of cash rather than visit banks. Although he claimed it gave him control, it actually caused him to face severe financial difficulties. His estate was drowning in debt by the time he passed away in 2006. His planned scholarships for disadvantaged children were postponed for years due to protracted legal disputes over his will. Even though Brown made millions, he had severe financial issues. He was detained several times for unpaid taxes in the late 1970s and early 1980s. His South Carolina mansion on Beach Island was among the properties seized by the IRS. His once estimated $100 million fortune decreased as a result of incessant legal disputes and subpar administration. The settlement was not reached until 2020. The $90 million sale of his music rights allowed him to finally create the scholarships he had always dreamed of. A portion of his vision was eventually realized after years of turmoil. James Brown was no longer the decade's dominant influence by the late 1970s, but disco was displacing him and moving his sound to the periphery. His records were no longer making the same kind of impact. They were deemed unimaginative by critics. It felt forced that he was trying to stay up with the latest trends. The crowds that had formerly crowded stadia were switching to something else. His private life was also in disarray. There were several arguments and allegations of domestic abuse in his marriage to Adriana Rodriguez. Teddy, his first son, lost his life in a vehicle accident in 1973, leaving him devastated. Pain like that doesn't simply go away. It weighed on top of everything else and remained with him. Brown had no labeled stable record by the 1980s. He was losing his career. Occasionally, he reminded everyone of his ability. In 1980, he played a successful part in the Blues Brothers. Living in America became an anthem in 1985. However, these occasions were infrequent. They failed to restore his previous level of success. Things were deteriorating behind the scenes. Brown had become severely dependent on PCP. He became erratic and paranoid due to the medicine. His unpredictable behavior now overshadowed his once famous theatrical presence. He was still regarded as a music pioneer throughout the world. However, his personal problems increasingly took center stage. It was made worse by his legal issues. He was often arrested for drug use and domestic violence between the 1970s and 1990s. He was jailed in 2004 at the age of 70 for shoving Tommy Ray Heine, his wife, and threatening to murder her. He entered a guilty plea to avoid a jury trial, but the harm had already been done. Particularly tumultuous were the late 1980s. Within 10 months, his violent outbursts were fueled by his addiction. In one instance in 1998, he led police on a car chase after firing a firearm at his South Carolina house. It bore a striking resemblance to the one that had garnered media attention 10 years prior. Then there were the charges made by former workers. Some said he had harassed them sexually. In one instance, he fired a woman who had spoken out against him, and a jury ordered him to pay $40,000. Though many felt he didn't deserve it, he was pardoned in 2003 for some of his prior crimes. Then, in 1988, one of the most outrageous events in his life occurred. Armed with a shotgun and high on PCP, Brown barged into an insurance seminar adjacent to his Augusta, Georgia, office. He was enraged, certain that his private toilet had been used by seminar attendees. Shouting at the frightened gathering, he waved the shotgun around. The cops were called. Brown did not give up, he ran. He got into his pickup and drove away. With police cars pursuing him at up to 85 miles per hour, the pursuit spanned 2 states. He continued to drive on rims for 6 more miles after they blew out 2 of his tires before he crashed into a ditch. He maintained that he had done nothing wrong even after being arrested. Later, he said the cops attacked him while making the arrest and shot his car more than 20 times. The consequences were dire. For assault and refusal to stop for authorities, he received a 6-year prison sentence. Before being granted parole in 1991, he had barely completed 2. In the 2014 biopic Get On Up, the entire scenario was reenacted since it seemed so implausible. He was admitted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on January 23, 1986. It was the first ceremony ever held in the hall. And Brown was one of the first 10 musicians to get this honor. He stood next to such legends as Ray Charles, Chuck Berry, and Elvis Presley. there was no denying his impact on R&B, funk, and soul. He had altered the motion and feel of music. How it affected a crowd. Prince, Michael Jackson, and Mick Jagger were among the artists who had observed his every move. Brown never slowed down as he grew older. He gave every show his all while performing non-stop. His voice was still powerful, and his dance steps were crisp. He remained James Brown on stage despite his personal issues, arrests, legal issues, and battles with addiction. Generation after generation was impacted by him. Hip-hop was founded on his music, which was sampled by artists such as Dr. Dre and Public Enemy. Performers like Bruno Mars and Michael Jackson exhibited their style. He died of pneumonia on December 25, 2006, at the age of 73. His legacy, however, endured. In 2013, he received a posthumous induction into the Rhythm and Blues Music Hall of Fame. He is still regarded as one of the finest artists by Rolling Stone. Pop, hip-hop, soul, and funk all still feature his sound. James Brown was more than just soul's godfather. He was a sound, a movement, an irresistible force whose impact endures to this day.